The sealmakers promised the monsoon had failed for the third consecutive year, and Mohenjo-daro was dying slowly. Ishara could see it in the way the Great Bath's water level dropped daily, revealing green-stained bricks that had been submerged since her grandmother's time. She could hear it in the marketplace conversations that stopped abruptly when authorities passed, resumed in whispers that carried words like migration and abandonment. The old cities in the west? She could feel it in her father's workshop, where commission requests had diminished from dozens per week to perhaps 3 or 4, and those only from merchants desperate to maintain appearances of normalcy while their trade goods gathered dust in empty warehouses. At 24, Ishara had mastered the art of seal carving. Learning from her father, Dravish the intricate techniques passed through 7 generations of their family. She could carve the sacred bull with such precision that each muscle seemed ready to move, could render the mysterious script characters so perfectly that priests praised her work as divinely inspired. Her seals were pressed into clay tablets throughout the Indus Valley, marking ownership and authenticity, serving as signatures for merchants and officials and craft guild masters. But seals required commerce to have purpose, and commerce required water, crops, trade routes that functioned reliably. All of these were failing. Her father rarely spoke about the crisis directly, maintaining the careful optimism that city leadership encouraged. But she noticed how his hands trembled slightly when carving now, how he sometimes paused mid-stroke and stared at nothing, his thoughts clearly traveling to futures he would not articulate aloud. The seal-making profession had survived for centuries in Mohenjo-daro, adapting to political changes and economic fluctuations, but it could not survive the fundamental environmental collapse that seemed to be consuming the Indus civilization from within. The day everything changed began ordinarily enough. Ishara was working on a commission from a textile merchant, carving his distinctive mark into a small steotite tablet. The morning sun slanted through the workshop's high windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. Her father had gone to the administrative district to inquire about a major commission rumor suggested might be available. Her younger brother, Kavi, was supposed to be organizing finished seals, but was instead watching boats on the nearby canal. Dreaming of the merchant adventures he insisted he would pursue once old enough to travel independently. The stranger arrived quietly, announced only by the soft sound of sandals on the workshop's stone floor. Ishara looked up from her carving to find a tall woman standing in the doorway, her clothing marking her as someone from significant distance west. The fabric was different, the weaving pattern unfamiliar, the decorative elements suggesting cultural traditions that varied from Mohenjo-daro's customs, but her bearing suggested authority, and the quality of her garments indicated wealth that survived whatever crisis was affecting the Indus cities. "I seek the master sealmaker Dravish," the woman said, her dialect recognizable but accented in ways that confirmed her foreign origin. "I have traveled many days to commission work that requires exceptional skill. My father is not here presently," Ishara replied, setting down her carving tools with the careful precision her training demanded. "I am Ishara, his daughter and apprentice. I can discuss commission requirements and provide examples of our work if that would serve your purpose." The woman studied her with an intensity that felt almost uncomfortable, her gaze moving from Ishara's face to her hands to the partially completed seal on the workbench. Something in that assessment suggested judgment being formed, conclusions being reached. "You carved the seal you are currently working on?" the woman asked. "Yes. My father taught me the craft. I have been carving independently for 6 years now, though major commissions still receive his supervision." "Show me your finest completed work," Ishara retrieved a small cedar box from the secure cabinet where they stored examples of exceptional craftsmanship. Inside lay 5 seals representing her best work across different styles and subjects. The sacred bull rendered with anatomical precision, complex geometric pattern that seemed to shift and move as light caught different angles. Portrait seal capturing a wealthy patron's features with remarkable accuracy. A nature scene showing a tiger stalking through vegetation so detailed that individual leaves were distinguishable. And finally, seal bearing the mysterious Indus script, arranged in a pattern her father had described as particularly auspicious. The woman examined each seal with the attention of someone who understood the craft deeply. She held them at different angles to observe how light and shadow revealed subtle details. She ran her fingertips across the carved surfaces, feeling for imperfections that eyes might miss. She pressed several into clay samples from her traveling bag, studying the impressions with the same intensity she had devoted to the originals. "Exceptional work," she said finally, and something in her tone suggested this was not casual flattery, but professional assessment. "Your technique rivals the finest seal makers I have encountered throughout the Indus Valley. The precision, the artistic vision, the understanding of how carved surface translates to pressed impression, all of this demonstrates mastery rather than mere competence." Ishara felt warmth spread through her chest. Praise from her father carried weight because it came from his expertise and investment in her success. Praise from strangers who understood the craft carried different weight, validation that existed independent of family loyalty. "You honor me. What commission brings you to Mohenjo-daro?" The woman's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Not a commission, exactly. A proposition. I am Zara, representative of the Western settlements in the Harappa Valley. We are establishing new communities for those who choose to leave the failing Indus cities. These settlements require artisans, particularly those whose skills serve essential functions in any organized society. Sealmakers rank highly among such artisans." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that extended far beyond simple commerce. Migration, abandonment of the ancient cities, acknowledgement that the crisis was not temporary disruption, but fundamental transformation. "The cities are not failing," Ishara said carefully, repeating the official position she had heard from administrators and priests. "We experience temporary difficulty with water management, but our engineers are addressing the situation systematically." Zara smiled without humor. "I've heard these assurances in Harappa and Kalibangan and Dolavira. I heard them in my own birth city before I made the decision to leave. The cities are dying, Ishara. Not from any single catastrophic event, but from the slow withdrawal of the conditions that sustained them. The rivers change course, the monsoons fail, soil loses fertility. The trade routes become less reliable. All of this happens gradually enough that people can pretend normalcy persists, even as evidence accumulates. That normalcy ended years ago. Ishara wanted to argue, to defend Mohenjo-daro's continued vitality. But standing in a workshop that received a fraction of its former commission volume, thinking about the half-empty marketplace, and the water level in the Great Bath and the whispered conversations about migration, she found that defense difficult to sustain. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked instead. "Come west. Bring your skill and your tools and your family if they choose to accompany you. The new settlements need sealmakers to establish legitimacy, to create the infrastructure of commerce and record-keeping that any successful community requires. We can offer security that Mohenjo-daro can no longer guarantee. We can offer opportunity to practice your craft in an environment where it remains valued rather than becoming obsolete as trade collapses. And if I refuse? If I choose to remain with my city," Adazar's expression softened slightly. "Then you remain, and perhaps I am wrong about the city's fate. Perhaps Mohenjo-daro survives and prospers, and my settlements become forgotten experiments. But I think you already know what the future holds here. I think you feel it every time commission requests diminish, every time you see the water levels drop, every time you hear people discussing whether to stay or leave. The question is not whether the cities will fail, but whether you will be trapped here when that failure becomes undeniable." The conversation continued for another hour, Zara describing the Western settlements in detail that suggested careful planning rather than desperate improvisation. They were building on higher ground near more reliable water sources. They were establishing agricultural systems adapted to changed rainfall patterns. They were recruiting skilled artisans and organizing craft guilds modeled on the Indus cities, but adapted to new circumstances. They were creating something that honored tradition while acknowledging that simple replication of the old ways was no longer viable. When her father returned, Ishara introduced Zara and explained the proposition. Dravish listened without interrupting, his expression revealing nothing until Zara had finished speaking. "You ask us to abandon our home, our heritage, the city my family has served for generations beyond counting," he said quietly. "You ask us to become refugees, to admit that our civilization has failed, to participate in its dissolution. I ask you to survive," Zara replied with equal quietness. "I ask you to ensure that seal-making survives, Your daughter's exceptional skill finds outlets rather than atrophying in a dying city. I ask you to recognize that honoring tradition sometimes means adapting it rather than insisting it remain unchanged even as circumstances make that unchanging continuity impossible.
Dravish was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between Zara and Aisha, his thoughts clearly traveling through complex territories of loyalty and practicality. Finally, he spoke. I will not leave Mohenjo-daro. I was born here. I will die here. That is not negotiable. But Ishara is young. She has decades of work ahead of her. Decades that will be wasted if she remains in a city that cannot support her craft. If she chooses to go west, I will not prevent it. I will support her decision even as it breaks my heart to make it. Ishara felt tears threaten, pushed them back through practiced control. She had known this moment was approaching, had felt it building through months of declining commissions and difficult conversations. But having it arrive with such suddenness, with such clarity, made it real in ways that abstract preparation could not capture. I need time to consider this properly, she said. This is not a decision to make hastily, of course. Zara agreed. I remain in Mohenjo-daro for 5 more days before returning west. If you choose to accompany me, bring your tools and whatever possessions you can carry comfortably. The journey takes approximately 2 weeks if conditions remain favorable. If you choose to remain, I honor that decision and wish you well. After Zara departed, Ishara and her father sat together in the workshop's comfortable silence. Kavi had wandered back inside, sensing that something significant had occurred but uncertain what role he should occupy in the aftermath. She is not wrong about the city's failing, Travis said eventually. I've been watching it happen for years now, hoping that adaptation would prove sufficient. But hope is not strategy, and wishing for conditions to improve does not actually improve them. The Indus Valley that I knew, that my parents knew, that sustained our civilization for centuries, that valley is transforming into something different. Perhaps it will support new forms of settlement and organization. But the old cities, built in old locations according to old assumptions, these will not survive the transformation intact. Then why not come west with me? Ishara asked. Why insist on remaining here if you acknowledge the city is failing? Her father smiled sadly. Because I am old, and old people do not adapt well to fundamental disruption. I know Mohenjo-daro's streets and canals and buildings. I know where to find the best clay for seal impressions. I know which merchants pay promptly and which require persistent collection efforts. I know how to navigate the administrative bureaucracy and the religious hierarchies, and the social expectations that govern every interaction. All of that knowledge becomes useless in new settlements where different rules apply, different customs prevail, different systems organize daily life. I would be starting over, and I lack the energy for starting over. But you would be with family, Ishara protested. We would figure out the new systems together. You would figure them out, Dravish corrected gently. I would slow you down, would resist changes that seemed unnecessary to me, would insist on maintaining traditions that no longer serve functional purposes. Better that I remain here, practicing my craft in the old ways for whatever time remains, while you go west and adapt seal making to new circumstances. That way, the craft survives even if I do not. The next 5 days passed in a strange mixture of normal routine and profound disruption. Ishara completed her pending commissions with extra care, wanting to leave no unsatisfied clients behind. She organized her tools, deciding which were essential enough to carry and which could remain with her father. She visited locations throughout Mohenjo-daro that held personal significance, the marketplace where her mother had taught her to calculate fair prices, the temple steps where she had played as a child, the workshop where she had first successfully carved a complete seal under her father's supervision. She also talked extensively with her father about technique and philosophy, recording in memory the lessons he had taught through years of patient instruction. They discussed how to identify quality steatite by texture and color. They reviewed the subtle hand movements that allowed precise carving in tiny spaces. They explored the artistic principles that transformed functional objects into beautiful ones. They acknowledged, without stating explicitly, that these conversations served as final teachings, that Ishara would need to carry forward alone everything she had learned from him. Kavi, now 14, announced that he wanted to accompany Ishara west. Their father initially resisted, arguing that Kavi was too young for such disruption. But Kavi insisted with a stubborn determination that ran through their family. "I do not want to be a seal maker," he explained. "I want to be a merchant, to travel and trade and see places beyond Mohenjo. The western settlements will have trade routes that require merchants. If I remain here, I will be trapped in a dying city learning a craft I do not wish to practice. If I go west, I can build the future I actually want, rather than the future others expect me to accept." Dravish eventually agreed, recognizing that insisting Kavi remain would accomplish nothing except creating resentment. On the morning of departure, the three of them stood together in the workshop, surrounded by tools and completed seals and memories accumulated across generations. "Remember that seal-making is not just craft, but communication," Dravish said. His final teaching offered as blessing rather than instruction. "Every seal tells a story about the person or institution it represents. Make those stories honest. Make them beautiful. Make them worthy of the trust that people place in your work, and make them flexible enough to adapt to whatever new circumstances the future creates." Ishara embraced her father, memorizing the feeling of his arms around her, the scent of clay and stone dust that always surrounded him, the sound of his heartbeat steady and familiar. Then she stepped back, collected her traveling pack and tool case, and walked out of the only workshop she had ever known. The journey west took 16 days, traveling in a caravan that included Zara, Ishara, Kavi, and approximately 30 other migrants leaving Mohenjo-daro for the new settlements. The group included potters and weavers, farmers and herders, a coppersmith and his apprentices, several families with young children. All of them were leaving behind the security of ancient cities for the uncertainty of new communities, betting that adaptation offered better survival prospects than insisting on continuity. They traveled through landscapes that showed evidence of the environmental changes transforming the region. Rivers that older travelers remembered as substantial were now reduced to seasonal streams. Agricultural fields that had once supported dense farming were reverting to smaller settlements they passed showed signs of recent abandonment, wells filled with debris, buildings collapsing without maintenance, irrigation channels choked with vegetation. But they also encountered evidence of adaptation and resilience. Some communities had developed new water management systems suited to reduced rainfall. Others had shifted to different crops or different economic activities. People were not passively accepting decline, but actively experimenting with responses. Some successful and others failing, but all demonstrating human capacity for innovation under pressure. Kavi flourished during the journey, his natural sociability finding outlets in conversations with fellow travelers. He learned about pottery techniques from the ceramicists, about textile trading from the weavers, about copper working from the smith. By the time they reached the western settlements, he had already identified potential business opportunities and was discussing partnership possibilities with merchants twice his age. Ishara spent the journey observing landscape and people with the attention she normally devoted to carving. She noticed how different regions used different building materials, how communities adapted architectural styles to local conditions, how merchants modified their practices based on available trade goods and transportation infrastructure. All of this was information that would inform her seal-making, allowing her to create work that reflected actual circumstances rather than nostalgic recreation of Indus Valley traditions. The western settlements appeared first as a line of buildings on the horizon, growing larger and more defined as the caravan approached. The architecture blended Indus traditions with adaptations suited to local conditions, smaller structures built on raised platforms to manage seasonal flooding, more emphasis on wind circulation to offset intense summer heat, water storage systems designed for capturing and preserving scarce rainfall. Zara led them through the main settlement, pointing out key locations and introducing them to community leaders. The organizational structure resembled Indus cities, but with modifications that reflected the settlement's origins as planned migration rather than organic growth. There were designated craft districts, marketplaces organized by trade type, administrative centers that coordinated water management and agricultural activities. But there were also innovations communal spaces designed for discussing collective decisions, agricultural experimental plots where farmers tested different crops and techniques, craft workshops that operated as cooperatives rather than individual enterprises. Ishara was assigned a workshop space in the artisan district, a small building she would share with a potter and a weaver. The arrangement felt strange after working in her father's established workshop, but it also offered opportunities for cross-craft collaboration that had been less common in Mohenjo-daro's more rigidly defined guild structure. The first weeks in the settlement required constant adjustment. She had to identify local stone sources suitable for steelmaking, establish relationships with merchants who might commission her work, learn the settlement's social structures and administrative procedures. She had to adapt her carving style to reflect the settlement's distinct characteristics rather than merely reproducing Mohenjo-daro's conventions. She had to prove herself to a community that valued skill, but also required that skill be relevant to their actual needs, rather than their nostalgic memories of cities they had left behind. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The settlement's administrative council approached her about creating a distinctive seal design that would authenticate official documents and establish the settlement's legitimacy in trade relationships with other communities. This was precisely the kind of major commission that would establish her reputation and provide sustainable income. She worked on the design for 3 weeks, consulting with council members about symbols and meanings, researching design elements from various Indus Valley traditions, experimenting with compositions that honored tradition while creating something distinctively new. The final design featured a stylized water vessel surrounded by wheat stalks, representing the settlement's focus on water management and agricultural innovation. The script elements she incorporated were traditional Indus characters, but arranged in patterns that suggested new meanings, new possibilities, new futures built from old foundations. When she presented the design to the council, their reaction exceeded her expectations. They recognized immediately that she had created something that was neither simple replication of old forms nor abandonment of valuable traditions. She had demonstrated that adaptation could honor heritage while acknowledging changed circumstances. "This is exactly what we need," the council leader said, examining the seal impression in clay with obvious approval. "It tells people who we are, inheritors of Indus civilization, but not trapped by insistence that nothing can change. It establishes legitimacy while asserting innovation. It says we are building something new that respects what came before." The commission led to others. Merchants wanted seals that reflected their trading relationships with both Indus cities and new Western settlements. Craft guilds wanted marks that honored traditional techniques while signaling adaptation to new markets. Families wanted personal seals that told their migration stories, commemorating cities they had left while claiming new identities and new homes. Kavi established himself as a successful merchant more quickly than anyone anticipated. His natural enthusiasm, combined with willingness to take calculated risks that older merchants avoided, allowed him to identify opportunities others overlooked. He developed trade routes connecting the western settlements with Indus cities that remained viable, with northern communities in Punjab, with southern settlements along the coast. By his 20th birthday, he employed several assistants and was being consulted by settlement leaders about economic development strategies. Watching her brother flourish, Ishara recognized that their migration west had provided him opportunities that would never have existed in Mohenjo-daro's more rigid social structure. The new settlements, precisely because they were new, allowed people to define themselves through capability rather than inherited position. Kavi's success came from merit rather than family connections, from innovation rather than traditional practices. 3 years after leaving Mohenjo-daro, Ishara received a letter from her father. The message was brief, delivered by a traveling merchant who had passed through the old city during a trading journey. Dravesh's health was declining. Commission requests had nearly ceased. Many of his fellow artisans had either died or migrated west, leaving the craft districts half. The administrative authorities were discussing which city sections could be maintained and which should be formally abandoned. He missed Ishara and Kavi tremendously. He was proud of their success in the western settlements. He had no regrets about remaining in Mohenjo-daro. He wanted them to know he loved them and wished them continued prosperity. The letter included his final teachings notes about advanced carving techniques he had not yet shared, observations about artistic principles he considered essential, stories about previous generations of their family and the challenges they had navigated. It read like a final testament from someone who knew his time was ending and wanted to ensure his knowledge survived him. Ishara wept when reading it, grieving not just her father's decline but the ending of an era, the dissolution of a civilization that had persisted for centuries. She wanted to return to Mohenjo-daro, to see her father one final time, to say goodbye properly. But the journey would take weeks, and there was no guarantee she would arrive before he died. And perhaps, more importantly, Returning would require confronting the full reality of the city's failure, seeing the empty streets and abandoned buildings and collapsed infrastructure that the letter only hinted at. She chose instead to honor her father through her work. She created a commemorative seal that told her family's story 7 generations of sealmaker Serbine. Mohenjo-daro faithfully adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining craft excellence, ultimately choosing to ensure the craft's survival even when that meant leaving the city that had sustained their family for centuries. The seal became one of her finest works, technically perfect and emotionally profound, capturing both grief and hope, loss and continuation. When word eventually came that Dravish had died peacefully in his workshop, surrounded by tools he had used for decades, Ishara conducted a memorial ceremony in the Western settlement. Community members gathered to honor a master artisan they had never met but whose legacy lived through his daughter's continued excellence. They shared stories about migration and loss, about maintaining tradition while adapting to necessity, about building new communities that honored old values even as circumstances forced modification of old practices. Years accumulated. The Western settlements grew and prospered, adapting continuously to environmental conditions that continued changing. Some Indus cities survived, though diminished in size and significance. Others were gradually abandoned, their populations dispersing to settlements better positioned for changed conditions. Mohenjo-daro itself persisted longer than many predicted, but eventually, its population declined to unsustainable levels, and the remaining residents made the difficult decision to migrate rather than remain. In a city that could no longer support organized urban life, Ishara continued sealmaking for 30 more years, training apprentices who would carry the craft forward into whatever futures developed. She adapted techniques to reflect changing circumstances, while insisting on the precision and artistic excellence that defined the profession at its best. She created seals that told stories about migration and adaptation, about communities built from displaced populations, about civilizations transforming rather than simply ending. Her own story became a legend in the Western settlements, told to children as an example of choosing possibility over comfort, of honoring tradition through adaptation rather than rigid preservation, of recognizing when circumstances required fundamental change rather than minor adjustment. She became known not just as an exceptional sealmaker, but as someone who embodied the settlement's founding principles: respect for heritage, combined with willingness to innovate, acknowledgement of loss, combined with commitment to building something worthwhile from difficult circumstances. When Ishara died at 70th, her funeral drew people from throughout the Western region, and even some from the surviving Indus cities. They gathered to honor not just an individual, but what she represented: the possibility of transformation, the courage required to leave security for uncertainty, the wisdom of adapting tradition rather than allowing it to become obsolete. Her seals were preserved as examples of artistic excellence in historical documentation, physical evidence that the Indus civilization had not simply failed but had transformed, adapted, persisted through people who chose to change rather than insist on impossible continuity. The craft she had carried west from Mohenjo-daro continued through her apprentices and their apprentices, evolving continuously while maintaining core principles of precision and artistry. The settlements she had helped establish grew into successful communities that blended Indus traditions with innovations suited to changed environmental conditions. And the story of the sealmaker who left her dying city to carry her craft into an uncertain future became a foundational narrative for communities built from displacement and determination. A reminder that civilizations end not with catastrophic collapse, but with thousands of individual choices about whether to cling to failing systems or build new ones suited to changed realities. Her final seal, created in her last year when her hands had lost their perfect steadiness but retained their fundamental skill, showed a tree with roots in water and branches reaching towards sky. Around its trunk were wrapped letters in the Indus script, words whose precise meaning had been lost over time, but whose symbolic significance remained: clear continuity and change, tradition and innovation, heritage and adaptation, all unified in a single image that honored both past and future.